So we'll just go ahead and get started. So you guys should remember that last time that we met, we were talking about cardiovascular health, and we talked about the risk factors associated with that, from the major risk factors that we had control over, like tobacco, things that weren't as big of a risk factor, like triglycerides, to things we didn't have control over, like our DNA, our age, whether we're male or female, our ethnicity. And so where we want to start today is we want to talk about what actually is cardiovascular disease. What are the forms of the disease? So when we talk about cardiovascular disease, what we really are talking about is something called atherosclerosis. And atherosclerosis is actually what cardiovascular disease is, and it's also referred to as plaque buildup in your arteries or in your vessels. So some of you may have heard about plaque building up in your vessels, and so we want to kind of paint a picture of what this actually looks like, what is actually atherosclerosis, or this cardiovascular disease that we've seen. And so to be able to kind of explain that, or kind of share that, I'm going to go over to this whiteboard that hopefully you guys will be able to kind of see. Can someone type in the message or just say yes that you guys can see that I've drawn like a giant circle right here? Awesome. Thank you, Vanessa. And so if we draw a circle like this, kind of think about this being your artery. And so kind of what I've drawn here is this would be your artery wall. This would be the outside over here where things kind of are kind of like your body, your organs. And then in the center of this vessel is going to flow blood. Okay, so blood's going to flow through this particular area, and a lot of us think about blood flowing through a vessel, or think about water through a garden hose. We all think that it kind of flows kind of very easily, like everything's single file line, but blood doesn't flow through a tube, or water flow through a garden hose in a very straight line. It actually bounces all around. And so what happens over time is the fact that blood's going to flow around and cause damage to this cell wall. So somewhere right in here, let's see, like if I take an eraser, what we might have happen is that some damage is caused. Well, that kind of went away very quickly. I was more thinking that it causes a little bit of damage in that particular area. So maybe some damage occurs, and think about like when your skin gets damaged, it causes some blood to happen. And this isn't the most terrible thing, because when damage happens, what will typically happen is the body will simply just create a clot in this area and heal that area as it goes through. This isn't inherently a bad thing, but think about if this happens over and over again, eventually something bad could happen. If you guys have ever had a scab form, maybe you've had, as a kid, you had something called what I consider road rash, which maybe is where you slid across some pavement, some concrete, or some asphalt, and kind of skinned up your leg real bad. If as that skinned spot on your leg kind of healed up and started to scab over, you might have noticed that scab was really sticky. Like you didn't want to put on shorts or pants or anything, because the clothes would stick to that area that you had caused injury to, because that scab was sticky. Well, when a clot forms on the inside of the vessel, the same thing happens. So what may eventually happen is the fact that this clot heals normally, but one of the times that it may happen, it becomes a little bit stickier than normal. And what we have is we may have some cholesterol or some things like kind of build up in this area and start to form what we call plaque, or the beginning of a clot. Now realize this process can happen in kids as young as 5 or 6, where we start having the buildup of material on this inside of the vessel. When it's very small like this, it doesn't really cause a lot of issues. It's not something of a big concern. It happens in young as kids as 5 or 6, but imagine something starting at the age of 5. By the time we get to 75, we had 75 years for this mass to continue to get bigger and bigger. So if we think about someone who doesn't have the best lifestyle choices, maybe they don't exercise and they don't eat they eat things that are high in saturated fats and trans fats and cholesterol, and maybe they smoke. What's going to happen over time is this clot's going to get bigger and bigger, is what we're going to see. is over time, it'll get just a little bit bigger. Now realize our vessels are actually well overbuilt. It's not that big of a concern. We can have a blockage buildup, kind of something similar to this, and it's not really going to cause too much of an issue. Our body's able to handle it. But because our body's able to handle this, we might not change things. We might not stop smoking. We may not start exercising. And so over a number of years, this is simply going to build up more and more and more. And so what may eventually happen is as we get older in age, we may start to see that this clot becomes bigger and bigger. And so maybe eventually we hit a source, we hit a spot in the body where we're now blocking, we have this clot or this plaque buildup that's blocking about 50% of our vessel. As you can see that this clot has now taken up 50% of the size of that vessel, which means that we're getting 50% less blood flow to the organs past, or the body parts that are past this particular area. Yes, sir? Or yes, ma'am? Okay. I just want to make sure no one had a question. And so we see this building up. Realize that a 50% blockage is actually not that severe in the fact that you won't really see any signs or symptoms from it. A doctor can't actually really see this going on. And this is not a great place to be. It's nothing to be concerned with at the particular moment. But if this continues to build, it could become a concern. And because we don't see signs or symptoms from a 50% blockage, what's very likely to happen is that someone continues on their lifestyle choices and we see this clot continue to grow. And so what may eventually happen is this clot eventually goes into a 75% blockage over a number of years. And we see that this 75% blockage, we're only getting 25% of the blood flow past this particular spot in our body as we go forward. This isn't necessarily, again, something that is overly concerned with our health, but we can't really measure it, but it could start to lead in that direction. And so because this isn't showing up as a big sign or symptom, this will continue to grow maybe to a 90% blockage. And so we continue to see this clot grow and grow and grow. Well, at a 90% blockage, where we're only getting 10% of blood past this of what we originally did when this vessel was first, developed, this can start to show problems and start to show itself, and doctors can start to see this happening. This is the process of atherosclerosis, is plaque building up, the blockage of blood flow. This is where we start to become concerned when it starts to get over 90%, because you may start to have shortness of breath while going up a set of stairs, or may start having your fingers and toes go numb. Doctors can treat this by shoving a wire up through your arteries and basically taking a drill bit and drilling all of this out and putting a stent in, which looks like a spring from a pin in this area to help keep this vessel open. But that's not the best scenario as it comes to it. And so if we continue to go, this clot can continue to build. Some people don't have signs and symptoms even at 90% blockage, and so we may hit a 95% blockage where we really only have this little bit of an area that is allowing blood flow, and it can even grow to a 99% blockage where we have very little area left where blood is getting by, or even almost 100% blockage. These things are of big concern and cause issues, and this is what cardiovascular disease actually is. It's the stoppage of blood flow. This can happen anywhere in any vessel in your body, from your arms and fingers to your legs and toes, to your central nervous system or your central of your body. And so we have to be concerned with this. Realize that our body can't do much to get rid of these clots. It really can't do much to get rid of them. We can't actually eliminate them. But let's say we go back to when this person had only a 50% blockage, such as what we have here. If a person decided to change their lifestyle and to kind of do things, this particular clot, this plaque that we have building up in the arteries is very weak. It's very flimsy and is very likely to break off. And so if you started to change, stop smoking, eat better, increase your exercise, what would happen is your body wouldn't be able to get rid of it, but what it would do is it would form a protective wall kind of around it so that it doesn't have as much issue at causing health effects. And this would allow blood flow to freely flow through this area here and not cause much side effects as it continues forward. Does that make sense? Are you guys following so far?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Marissa. And so we have this going on. If I click on this, can you guys see the forms of the disease again? Do you guys see the PowerPoint again, or are you still seeing that picture of the drawing?
Just see the picture.
Just see the picture? Okay. I just want to make sure that I kind of get it where you guys can see what I want you to see. Awesome. There you go. You guys should be able to see that now. So when we talk about atherosclerosis, that process we just looked at, that is actually cardiovascular disease. When we look at it, though, depending on where that disease actually happens, we may be able to find it a little bit further. So we have things called heart disease, or heart disease also leads to heart attacks. So when atherosclerosis or cardiovascular disease happens in the vessels that supply the heart with blood. So the heart's a muscle, it needs blood on its own, it has its own vessels that give it that. So in the coronary arteries, when the atherosclerosis or the plaque develops in those particular places, we call that heart disease. So it's in the vessels of the heart that this happens. The blocking of that blood flow can lead to a heart attack, which is where the heart muscle doesn't get enough blood and it starts acting abnormally. This can happen in a lot of scenarios. And one of the ways we know that someone may be having a heart attack is through something called angina pectoris. And angina pectoris is simply a fancy medical term for the word chest pain. Now, realize that your heart doesn't have any nerve endings, which means your heart can't actually feel pain. So if I was able to go inside your chest and squeeze your heart or stab it with a knife, you actually wouldn't feel that your heart was hurting because it doesn't have any nerve endings. But when the heart isn't acting normally, what happens is there are other parts of the body that aren't getting enough blood that have nerve endings. And so what may happen is you may feel chest pain or indigestion. You may feel left arm pain because that left arm is not getting enough blood, so it hurts. Or maybe even jaw pain is more typical in women than having chest pain or left arm pain. This can be identified through what we call an arrhythmia. An arrhythmia is the electrical current of the heart. Your heart has an electrical current to it. Kind of think electricity flowing through your house. We can measure this. And if you've ever watched a medical drama on TV shows, you see that little thing in the corner that always goes beep, 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 and lets us know that they're alive. And if it ever goes beep, we know that they're dead. We can actually look at this current that is measuring. This is called an EKG. We can look at that particular current and evaluate whether someone may be having a heart attack or if they've had one in the past. When it comes to heart attacks, they're not great. We want to try to prevent those. But what we're truly worried about is what we call sudden cardiac death. And this is where you have a heart attack that is so severe that it blocks so much blood to the heart that the heart literally dies. And if the heart dies, it doesn't regrow on its own. And if the heart dies, that means we're not getting enough blood to the rest of our body, and it literally will kill us. And so these are the people who grab their chest and go to the ground and never wind up waking up. And this is a big concern when it comes to heart disease, is something called sudden cardiac death. Another thing to talk about is a stroke. A stroke is cardiovascular disease of the blood supply to the brain. Okay, so heart attack or heart disease was all about the blood that supplies the heart. Well, a stroke is how we talk about cardiovascular disease and the vessels that supply the brain. So it could be referred to as a brain attack like it is a stroke. When it comes to this, these are just as severe, if not as worrisome as heart disease, because the brain material is just as important. We cannot live without our brain. And if parts of the brain don't get enough blood, they will die and our brain material doesn't regrow. So maybe it doesn't kill us, but it could leave us with long-lasting effects as having mental troubles or troubles moving or various things across those platforms. So when it comes to having a stroke, realize we can have three different styles of a stroke. So the first one is a thrombotic stroke. And a thrombotic stroke, let's go back to our whiteboard and I'll kind of, cool, it kept it. A thrombotic stroke was that example of basically this clot growing in such a fashion that it blocks blood flow. So maybe that clot grows over time and it literally blocks blood flow to the brain where no blood can get past it. This would be considered a thrombotic stroke. This is typically what happens in a heart attack, is that plaque material, that cardiovascular disease material, grows to such an extent that it blocks blood flow altogether. In a stroke, it can happen this way, but it can also happen as what we call an embolotic stroke. And what an embolotic stroke is it's where the clot may not be fully developed. It may not be blocking blood flow, but maybe it's as big as what we're showing here. Maybe it's only a 50% blockage. And let's say this person that has this blockage in their brain, so a vessel in their brain has a blockage like this, and they get very angry. Maybe they're getting traffic and someone cuts them off and they get super, super angry. Well, that anger causes a rise in blood pressure, and if that blood pressure becomes too high, this clot could break off. It literally could break off and start floating down the vessels. Well, as we continue down our vessels like arteries, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so this piece of clot that broke off, while not a big issue in this part of the vessel, as it goes further and further along and the vessels get smaller and smaller, it may eventually become stuck and lodged in that area and block blood flow. This is a big concern because it is causing that same issue to happen, but it just floated further down. And so this would be an embolotic style. One last other style of stroke that we can have is the fact that sometimes instead of the plaque building up on the outside of the vessel, it may build up actually on this inside of this cell wall right here. So it actually can build up inside of the vessel and block blood flow. And what this does is it creates a very weak kind of cell wall here. And if the blood pressure increased too much, what may happen is the fact that this cell wall may rupture and all the blood would start leaking out into the brain and causing brain damage because of the pressure buildup that occurs. So we have a lot of different ways that a stroke can happen. Again, all of these are of concern and just happen in different ways, and why we're so concerned with these. Finally, when it comes to forms of the disease, we have something called congestive heart failure, which is where the heart is still alive and moving blood, but it's not doing it in a way that you can actually fully be a functional member of society. So it's enough to keep you alive, but not so that you can do too much. Typically, congestive heart failure, when we're talking about cardiovascular disease, happens because someone has had a bunch of little heart attacks. Each heart attack has killed a small portion of the heart. And when a small portion of the heart dies over time, if a lot of small portion of the heart dies, the heart can't function normally. And so the heart's moving enough blood to keep you alive, but not enough to keep it where you can function normally. Realize heart tissue doesn't regrow and kind of regenerate itself. And so with someone with congestive heart failure, more than likely they're going to need a heart transplant in order to continue to have a normal functioning life as they go through. Are you guys doing good so far? Is all this making sense? Do you guys have any questions as it relates to this?
Doing good so far.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So as we go through this, we've talked a lot about this semester about cardiovascular disease. We've talked about ways to prevent it. And so we're just going to kind of retouch on prevention. We'd rather prevent cardiovascular disease than trying to have to deal with it because there's no easy way to deal with it. And so preventing cardiovascular disease is things like adjusting your diet. And so let's see, doing good. Okay, all of you guys are doing good. Adjusting your diet, so lowering how much fat that you eat, increasing the amount of fiber you consume, lowering how much salt we take in, so in the form of sodium, and increasing potassium. All of these are going to help with blood pressure and that cardiovascular disease risk. Limiting our alcohol consumption can help with lowering those risks. Making sure you exercise and that you limit your tobacco consumption. Controlling our blood pressure through diet and exercise, but also through medications, talking to your doctor, and similar to that for cholesterol as well. One of the things that people don't necessarily associate with their cardiovascular health is that we actually need to learn how to control our stress and our anger. When our anger is out of control, our blood pressure goes up, and this increases our risk for cardiovascular disease. And if we're stressed out for long periods of time, we know that this also increases our risk for cardiovascular disease and can cause issues in the long term as we move forward. And so handling that stress and anger, learning how to cope with those things is an important thing to do to help prevent heart attacks and strokes later on in life. And so with that, we're actually, we have finished our cardiovascular chapter. So we've gotten that out of the way. And so where we're going to move now is we're going to start talking